It was August 1974. I was 27 years old and had been separated from my husband for 3 months, but he asked me to go on vacation together again. In the meantime, I lived with my little son Felix, who was almost 6 years old, in an own apartment, but I hadn't completely separated from my husband. An inner voice had long before warned me about the holiday trip, and I had already dreamed of an accident with serious consequences. This dream haunted me, but I still agreed to go on vacation together. The 3 of us spent 2 weeks in France. My relationship with my husband had not improved. I felt that the breakup was right for us, and that we shouldn't be together in the future either. On September 4, 1974, we were on our way back. Since a section of the freeway from Paris was closed, we continued on a country road. Our son had fallen asleep in the back seat, and so did I. Suddenly I was wide awake. My husband was passing a truck, but apparently he hadn't noticed that there was a bend in the road, and a car came towards us in this hidden spot. This car shot towards us. But suddenly my perception of time had changed, and it seemed to me that the car was now slowly coming towards us. It was clear to me that a collision would be inevitable. I thought calm and without fear, so this is what it's like to die. Then I rolled over to hold my son who had fallen asleep in the back seat. Of course I didn't succeed, as I found out later. Felix flew through the windshield. I passed out. I didn't remember the impact. After that I was in a coma-like state, but as if from afar I recognized the many helpers at the scene of the accident. My husband and Felix had meanwhile been taken to the hospital. I was alone in the car. The rescue workers tried to cut me out of the completely dented car. I just kept whining, "My leg. My leg." I was in so much pain that I kept fainting. To this day, I can't remember being transported to the hospital. I only regained consciousness in the hospital room. However, I couldn't see anything. This scared me a bit at first, but I quickly accepted it as unavoidable. I wanted to know what happened to Felix. I tried to ask but couldn't get a sound out. Then I heard Felix ask in the next room, "Where is Mama?" Relieved that Felix was alive, I now prepared myself for death. I wasn't afraid at all. Now that I know Felix is alive, I can die in peace, I thought. I still couldn't see anything. I could only feel everyone trying desperately to care about me. "She has no more blood," they cried. After that it got uncomfortable for me. Cold, wet sweat covered my body. But that moment passed quickly. I still couldn't make myself noticed. Then suddenly I got out of my body. I was on the ceiling of the hospital room. Several doctors and nurses stood around my bed and worked on my body. I looked down and looked at my body indifferently and with no particular feelings. I wasn't really interested in what was down there. I watched the hustle and bustle in the operating room for a while. The fact that everyone was still preoccupied with my body shell didn't impress me that much anymore. Rather, I was curious about what lay ahead. I felt more free than ever in my life. All the pain I had been struggling with was gone. I was so light I could move anywhere. I listened to the conversations in the operating room for a while. Then I tumbled into a dark tunnel. I was drawn into it with all my might. I rumbled down the tunnel. The sounds resembled the rumble of an earthquake that I later experienced. But I wasn't afraid at all. In fact, I couldn't wait to see the bright light at the end of the tunnel. I tumbled faster and faster towards the end of the tunnel. Angels floated at the edge of the tunnel and accompanied me. I finally reached my goal. The light enveloped me more and more. I floated out of the tunnel and landed in a meadow. About 20 to 30 people were waiting for me in front of a kind of fence. The fence was invisible, but it was there. I just knew. I can't explain it any better. I recognized everyone. They were old friends of mine. They greeted and hugged me with such love and joy as I had never experienced in my life. The strange thing about meeting these friends was, but I only realized this after my return to this world, that I had never met any of the people here on Earth in the earthly reality. This was proof to me that I had to have lived at least once to know all these people, because they were closer to me than any of my friends and relatives from my current Earth life. I talked to my friends, but I didn't use the language form. We communicated with telepathy. As soon as a question crossed my mind, the answer reached me. I could perceive all the thoughts of my friends, and of course they could also perceive mine. After a while I broke away from the group and walked on. It is beyond my ability to express the colors of the landscape. Even today, I still lack the words to describe this splendor of colors and this music in the hereafter. In contrast, life in this world runs like in a laundry room, like in a fog, like in a negative film. The colors there were so clear and bright. I went further. The love around me enveloped me. No thought of my son, whom I loved more than anything, of my family. I was finally home again. Nobody would be able to get me out of this paradise again, I thought to myself. I kept looking around. I had never seen such beautiful meadows, fields and trees here in this world. I especially noticed the colorful birds. But even with the limited vocabulary we use here on Earth, I can't even describe their plumage and singing with any degree of accuracy. Later I thought to myself that life in the so-called afterlife is much more real than in the earthly world. Everything seemed much clearer, truer and more understandable to me. All real life happened there. I was magically attracted to another figure of light. She was sitting under a tree a little further away from my reception group and was waiting for me. I also knew this person. She was more familiar to me than anyone else. And although I wasn't particularly Christian at the time, for me it was Jesus Christ. I just knew. I flew into the arms of my spirit guide, which is what I later called this person dressed in bright white to my friends and acquaintances. I found it too presumptuous to call this shining figure Jesus. The man hugged me and held me tight. I never wanted to leave this place for anything in the world. That was pure love that was all around me. Whenever I felt bad later on, I remembered this hug, and then life became bearable again. Again we talked in the form of telepathy until the beautiful figure gently pulled away from me a little, looked intensely into my eyes and said, "You have to go back. You have work to do on earth." I clung to Jesus Christ and cried, "I'm not going back. I want to be with you." My friends also came up to us and lovingly asked me to go back. I should realize that my task on earth was not yet completed. I didn't see that, of course, but I knew I couldn't stay. At the same time, it was also clear to me that I would eventually return to this realm. Before that, however, I was allowed to explore the afterlife with my friends. A requiem was played for me as a farewell gift. The air seemed saturated with this music. The experience of these tones, this music, cannot be expressed in our words. Then I squeezed myself back into my now much too tight body. It was as uncomfortable as putting on a tight wet suit. The next morning, after the first operation, when I was responsive, the doctors wanted to see me and tell me how much trouble they had taken to keep me alive. But I replied without thinking anything about it, "I know you all already." That confused the doctors. They looked at me as if I had been mentally damaged in addition to the physical injuries. At that time I did not yet have the courage and strength to speak openly about my experience. The first reactions of disbelief from my relatives and friends stopped me. There, in the afterlife, I suddenly became aware of how the earth worked. Everything was so simple, clear and wise. It was as if I had received the knowledge of the whole world. But unfortunately I was informed that I should forget this knowledge again in my future life on earth. I still try desperately to snag a reminder of that knowledge from time to time. In flashes of inspiration it works, but the overall knowledge is gone. What I know very clearly is that when you leave earthly life for good, you cannot take anything material with you from earth. No money, no house, no jewelry can be taken away. Nothing on earth really belongs to you. Every human being is just a guest, and every guest should strive to behave well on the earthly planet. You can only take love, feelings and knowledge with you into the afterlife. I'm increasingly trying to help other people deal with death, because death isn't the end, it's a new beginning. And even if you're really desperate and long for an end, suicide is by no means a solution. You think you're going to sleep peacefully and never wake up. The opposite is the case. You are not unconscious for a second. The transition to the other world is gradually. Since this experience, I'm no longer afraid of death, only the fear that in my current life I will no longer be able to do everything I set out to do. Because every second is precious and you frivolously waste so many of them. I was often asked later how I saw myself and my friends in the afterlife. Of course, I wasn't wearing my jeans and t-shirt anymore. I felt like a being of light dressed in white. My friends, on the other hand, wore earth-colored clothes that were a bit old-fashioned. They had chosen an age at which they probably felt most comfortable. They all seemed to be around 30 to 35 years old. I have not met children in my realm of the hereafter. Even today, Some doctors believe that such experiences are hallucinations caused by a lack of oxygen. But I think every person who has had an out-of-body experience like this knows that the afterlife exists. Others can doubt it as much as they want for my sake.